Ready to face your fears head on, conquer them, and create a safer, more prosperous future? Worried that the world has gone nuts and you've become an insanity magnet? Then grab a cold libation, put on your fuzzy slippers, and get ready to create your own safe space. It's the Safe Space Podcast with your host, Tammy D. For more information and episodes, go to www.saferpodcast.com. That's www.saferpodcast.com.
Hey, everybody, this is Tammy DeLu, and welcome again to the Safe Space Podcast. It's the podcast that brings you the most unusual, entertaining people I can find from a various number of fields. I mean, I don't limit myself at all, and today I'm back in that familiar place, which is the financial services industry. Today I have Jim Fish. Jim's been in the business for quite a while, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his background and his focus, because what I like that Jim is doing is that he's focused on federal employees. Because, you know, it's funny, those of us who don't work for the government, Jim, we always think that they must have it easy because, you know, we have to dig through all the paperwork and jump through all the hoops, and we have to understand all the arcane terminology that only the government can come up with, right? So we figure that the employees are exempt from that, but they're not. And they need a lot of help with their benefits because really they don't have much support. So is that true, Jim?
That is absolutely true, Tammy. Thank you for having me on.
Sure.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
But tell us about yourself
of the government.
first,
Sure.
How you got into this, and then tell us what you've observed with these poor people that are left to fend for themselves.
So my background, I had a business. My father and I had a business. It was a tax bookkeeping practice. I handled all the, income tax statements for the clients, payroll tax filings, and kind of simple 1040 returns. And my father would handle all the partnership, corporate, LLC returns, kind of the higher level, more complicated returns. He passed away towards the end of 2008. And at that point, I just did not feel comfortable doing those higher level, more complicated returns. So I felt that it was in the best interest of the clients to sell the practice to a CPA who can continue to provide them the level of service that they've been accustomed to. So I did that. And to backtrack for a second, when my father passed away, he didn't have, a financial plan or succession plan in place. So he passes away and kind of left trying to figure out what to do next, and had to navigate, go through probate and do all those unfun things, so to speak. So once, I sold the practice to the CPA, I became extremely interested in financial services, making sure that clients had a plan, business owners had a succession plan, if, anything should come up. Because my father went in, got diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and 30 days later passed away. To say it was a shock is an understatement.
I've had people tell me similar stories. I have an advisor whose dad was young, like 45, I think, and died all of a sudden of a heart attack. He had no idea he had a problem at all.
You never know. So after that happened, it's kind of when my focus shifted, and I wanted to get into financial planning and help clients have a plan in place so that, something like this would not happen. And I can speak to firsthand knowledge of what it's like to not have a plan and what it does to the family and trying to grieve and also figure out what you're going to do with the business or with the accounts that were not in probate. It's a lot to undertake in a short amount of time.
So you had on-the-job training, basically. Yeah, and you took that, and as many people do. This is a very commonplace event where some member of the family, often the oldest child in the family, is left to deal with this, and they become an expert, a de facto expert in these things, but not because they want to. So in your case, you actually learned some things that stimulated your interest in financial services. You saw the necessity for life planning, for financial planning, for, oh my gosh, business succession. That's a whole program right there. And then you started seeing a problem with some of the federal employees you encountered. So what were you seeing with those poor people? And how did you become a specialist in that area?
So what's funny is that I went through, got my licenses, and went to work initially for Edward Jones, is where I kind of cut my teeth. And, if you know anything about the Edward Jones model, it's a lot of door knocking. Yeah, in Southern California, it does not work very well. Where most people don't know their neighbors, let alone answer the door when some guy in a suit comes walking up.
Exactly. They think you're a serial killer or a cult leader or a cult recruiter.
Right. They're like, oh my God, David Koresh is showing up at my doorstep. Went to work for Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and then when I was at J.P. Morgan as a private client advisor, one of the clients was a USPS employee, and they were getting ready to retire, and I had built up a relationship whenever I saw them in the bank, talked to them, and this lady comes in one day with this booklet that's about 190 pages. She goes, Jim, can you help me with this? I said, sure, let me take a look at it. So we go into my office, we sit down, and, I asked her, what is it? I want to retire from the post office, and this is the packet they sent me, and told me that I need to fill it out and get it back to them.
Ah, the infamous workbook.
The infamous blue book, exactly.
Blue book,
Now,
yes.
I had never seen one before. Well, I kind of navigate my way through it and help her fill it out. Found out that she was, overpaying for her group life insurance. She had family coverage on there, which she was not married and had no kids. So she was overpaying for her group life insurance. We were able to go back and get that amount refunded to her. She was so happy that I helped her fill out that blue book that she referred me to a couple of other coworkers that she had that were getting ready to retire. And from there, I realized that these people have no support. You get hired by the federal government, it's like you're entitled to these benefits. And that's it. Now the employees got to go through and navigate, well, how do I sign up for this? Do I need that? How much life insurance do I need? How does my group life insurance work? I know I get a TSP. How do I contribute to that? How much am I supposed to contribute to it? They get no help, when they sign up. So I just came to realize that this is such an underserved market, and these people get absolutely no help. So it just kind of by accident fell into it, and I've been helping federal employees ever since.
Well, yeah, and you went ahead and got some specialized training too in that, right?
I did. I got my federal retirement consultant designation, and that's through FINRA, which is the governing body for financial advisors. You need to go through them to get your Series 7, your Series 66. So I went through that, got that designation. And what that means is that they've done a background check on me. I passed all the required exams. They went back and made sure that I wasn't a criminal and didn't file bankruptcy and those things. And it gives me that specialized designation to really work with federal employees and make sure that they understand all of their benefits. Not only how they work when they first get hired, how their benefits continue to change as they progress through their federal career, and then ultimately into retirement, how those benefits change again.
And the other thing I think that's really important to note is, if I were a federal benefit, benefits recipient, I would also want to know how what I'm getting compares to the private sector, and whether there are any gaps between what I'm getting and what, Joe Blow at General Motors is getting and things like that, so that I could make better decisions. Because, you mentioned when we were talking before about FEGLI, and I love acronyms. I'm sure that was a fun part of learning all this.
There's acronyms for everything.
Yes. And I, again and again, have talked to people such as yourself who specialize in these, and they've told me that there are definitely ways to improve these benefits. As good as they are, there are definitely ways to tweak them so that they're more efficient and you get a better result when you retire, including FEGLI. What have you found is the number one thing you see when you look at federal employees, the way they have their benefits. Is it the insurance that's the problem, or are there other things that you usually have to address?
Insurance is absolutely one of the problems because most federal employees do not understand FEGLI, how it works, how it continues to increase in cost as you get older. And they don't realize that you can get better options outside in the private sector. Also, with their TSP, I can't tell you how many times I've come across employees that are underfunding their TSP and not taking advantage of the government match and leaving money on the table. I don't fault the employee because they're not getting educated on it.
Instead of hiring 85,000 new IRS agents, you'd think they could take some of that money and maybe hire a few educators to go around and help their own employees, right? I mean, maybe that's just
you
me.
would think.
You think.
But
it's good for you, for people like you who work, you sort of have a foot in both worlds. And so your process for working with these people, I mean, like, what do you do initially? Like when someone says, hey, I work for the post office, I'm getting ready to retire in 2 years. Walk me through how you would help me.
The first thing we do is we sit down and do a full consultation. So I'll look at their pay stub because the pay stub has codes on there under the deductions that let me know exactly how they're set up with their benefits, what benefits they have, what they're paying for, what they don't have. It's all stated right there on that pay stub. So what I do is I go through that pay stub with them code by code to make sure that they understand exactly what this is, what you're getting charged for, what you're paying. And I can't tell you how many times there's allotments on that pay stub that they have no idea what it's for. And it's something that they could have signed up for 30 years ago that they don't need anymore, and they've been paying on it for 30 years. So we'll go through that. I want to make sure that they understand everything. Then what we'll do, then from there, I'll do a kind of a review and an analysis of what they can expect pension-wise. I'll do that calculation. And then we'll also make sure that if they don't know Social Security amount, then we make sure that we sign up for an account on socialsecurity.gov so that they know exactly what they're going to receive from Social Security at the time they retire. Because you're going to need to know all of that prior to retirement to know, hey, I can retire now, or I might need to work a couple more years based on what the income's going to be. Because the last thing you'd want to do is retire and then realize, shoot, I don't have enough income. Now I got to go work another job.
Well, that happens a lot, actually. And I know another thorny problem that some of the guys that do what you do have told me about is that people, you were talking about codes, but there's also other kinds of coding that you can be put in the wrong category and not be getting the right amount taken out of your check. Is that something, or is that a military problem?
Absolutely.
I was going to say it also with military pay, like when they're overseas, they get there's a differential between different kinds of tours of duty or something where you should be. I mean,
Sure.
It's really complicated. I don't know how you can keep up with it, honestly.
Yeah, it's challenging. I used to do a lot of tax paperwork. So when people come in and do their taxes, they got all kinds of forms, and you got to kind of put everything together. And working with federal employees, not only federal employees, but pre-retirees in the private sector, it's, you got to put that puzzle together. And that's what makes it so enjoyable.
So say the same kind of issues apply to state employees. Is that something that you do also, or is it just mostly federal? I mean, I know that they're different, but there's some principles that are still the same between those two groups.
There's a lot of similarities. Some state employees are a little bit different because they get a pension, so a lot of them don't have Social Security, or if they put in their time working for the state and then got a private sector job, then you got to look at, offsets and, phase outs for Social Security. So that makes it a little bit more complicated. Those people, they don't have anybody that'll really help them.
You can't wait until 6 months before you retire to start this. I mean, if you're a federal employee,
absolutely not.
Yeah, you want to do it, would you say at least 2 or 3 years before you're actually contemplating retiring?
I tell everybody you need to start 5 years prior to your retirement date. What most people don't realize is that as you get closer to retirement, those risks that you had when you were first starting to work are now different. You have different set of risks as you approach retirement and into retirement. And the most vital time for those people, pre-retirees, are the 5 years, the last 5 years of your work right before retirement, and the first 5 years into retirement. That 10-year span is the most critical.
Yeah, that's like what they call the red zone. The red zone, is that what you're talking about?
The red zone, exactly.
The red zone.
Because if we have a significant market downturn, kind of similar to what we're going through right now, and you're planning on retiring in the next couple of years, and you haven't gone through and reallocated and checked your retirement account, and you lose 30% of your value, you don't have the time to make that back, right? If you just retired and you're using your retirement funds to supplement Social Security, and we have a 30% pullback in the market, now you have a greater likelihood of running out of retirement funds.
Oh, absolutely. I just had a guy call me, one of my advisors I work with, and he said one of his clients called him in a panic. They lost $40,000 out of their IRA. Mm-hmm. 40 grand. This is just in a couple of days. So yeah, it can happen in the private sector, and it can even, so here's the thing. I think a lot of employees, the government employees, may go into it believing that the government's got it under control. After all, they've been doing this for 200 years or whatever. They've got it under control. And then they hear these stories of the so-called TSP millionaires. And I think they sit back and just believe that it'll all fall together when they get ready to start thinking about retiring. So I know you run into that. What causes them to come to you? What's the panic point at which they go, oh my God, I have no clue what's going on here?
I had a client that I worked with, this gentleman in Hawaii, had about $500,000 in his TSP. And I went down and met with him. We pulled up his TSP. In 1 month, he lost $100,000.
In 1 month?
Yep. In 1 month.
$100,000?
And I'm like, and I looked at him and I was like, a lot of people, you hear the saying, set your investments and don't worry about it. They'll grow over time. You know what? That's a great strategy when you're 25, 30. When you're 60 and planning on retiring in the next couple of years, not the best strategy. You got to be on top of that. At that point, it's not so much about accumulation. It's more about preservation.
Exactly. That's a really good point. It's taking that money and creating income from it that is not going to run out 2 years into retirement.
Exactly. And just supplement. And instead of having a two-legged stool like federal employees have between their pension and Social Security, now you're taking a portion of that TSP and adding that third leg.
Because I'm just looking at all the, the volatility and stuff is what you don't want if you're only a couple of years away from retirement. So when you're looking at all these, there's some really amazing benefits that government employees have. I look at them when I was researching for some of the articles I did, and I was like, wow, that's really good. That's good. That's good. So in some of the weak areas, what do you think are the weak areas where federal employees need to pay attention and maybe look at private solutions versus what they have? Besides insurance, we said life insurance, that's a real big one. Are there some other areas that may profit from looking at a private solution?
Life insurance, disability, you'll get better options. Long-term care, extremely important. And a lot of federal employees don't have a long-term care plan. But as we know, 1 in 4 adults is going to need some form of long-term care or home health care.
Gosh, that can be $10,000 a month or more here in California.
Yeah, and that right there is one of the biggest derailments to portfolios, is not having a plan in place for that.
So some people would say, well, you know what? I've looked at long-term care standalone policies, Jim, and they're super expensive. I can't justify the cost, or I don't think I'll qualify because, the underwriting requirements for the standalone LTC are pretty strict. What are some things you could do if you're a federal employee instead?
Great question. So there's, hybrid life insurance policies that you can do that will give you some long-term care benefits attached to it. And that's a great option for younger federal employees, anywhere from 40 to 50. And it also will generate some cash value accumulation. For older employees, there's hybrid annuities that you can do that will give you long-term care benefits to it as well. So there are options outside of the traditional medically underwritten long-term care policies. Because yes, those are extremely expensive as you get older and extremely hard to qualify for when you get older. People don't think about long-term care until something happens, right? And at that point, it's too late.
I think they're starting to think about it too. If something happens to their parents, that's another time when people go, uh-oh, dad has to go to a memory care facility, and you go, wow, that's going to be me in a few years. That may be a time. But at that point, if you would be better off, I think, you could get a long-term care policy does have sometimes more benefits, a little more robust, but the best time to buy that is at an age where you're not even thinking about that, like in your 30s or your 40s. So
exactly. When it's more cost effective.
Exactly. So there's right. Some forward-thinking people I know that have purchased those policies in their 30s, and it's going to be great for them when they get to that age. But most people, they're just struggling to put food on the table and get the kids through high school and college and everything. And so they're not thinking that way.
Right. It's not on their mind.
Yeah. And federal employees are no different. A federal employee's busy, a lot of times trying to get up through the ranks, trying to do all the requirements of their job, and they're not really thinking until a few years into it. Maybe some of their colleagues are retiring and they're telling them, hey, I ran into this problem, or I did this or that. And they're thinking maybe at that point they start considering retirement. But it's always better, in my opinion, Jim, I think you know this too, that the sooner you get started, the more time you have, like you said, to recover from mistakes. It's just the way it works. So what's another thing that you've seen federal employees do, like a mistake that you see them make that could be very costly when they get ready to leave service?
One of the biggest ones that I see is in regards to the TSP. Federal employees get up to a 5% match from the government, which is extremely unheard of nowadays. I mean, most companies don't match 5%. And what you come across is employees putting in 1% or 2%. No, I'm like, look, you gotta somehow, some way put in 5%, because you're leaving money on the table. Okay, if you don't put in 5%. Over a 20-year career, I mean, you're gonna have a significant amount of growth. Not only just with your contributions and what the federal government contributes. The other thing I tell them is, when I come across an employee who's putting in more than 5%, I tell them to adjust it and make 5% traditional contribution. Anything above the 5%, make those Roth contributions. You only get matched up to 5%. So anything over that, make that a tax-free bucket to you in retirement.
That's a good idea. I didn't even think about that. That's a lot of tax benefits there, and all sorts of
yes.
Are you allowed to even roll over TSP money into a Roth? Like if somebody retires, do they ever come to you and say, you know what, I want to roll the whole thing over into a Roth?
With a TSP, if you have a traditional TSP, the answer is yes, you can roll it over into a Roth, but you got to realize that you got to pay all the taxes on that untaxed money. So you can have a huge tax burden if you try to roll all of it over into a Roth.
While you're on the subject of 401ks and stuff, if you're listening to this and you are a private employee and your employer still gives you a match, it's crazy not to at least contribute to the level of the match. You know what I mean? Because it,
absolutely,
like he said, it's free money, and you don't know if your next job is even going to give you that advantage or not. I used to have an employer that did, and I learned from the school of regrets, Jim. I graduated from the school of regrets. When they had a dollar for dollar match at one employer I worked for. I mean, up to a certain threshold, obviously, but sure. I didn't take advantage of it. I don't know whether it was just because I was young and I thought I was super and never would get old and never die. And when the first gray hair started coming in, I'm like, I better do something. And I missed all that opportunity to prosper.
Well, and the thing is, nobody shows them the benefit of taking advantage of it. You get hired on and it's like, oh, you get a 5% match. Okay, great. And that's all that said. I think, employees need to see the benefit of taking advantage of that match and how that's going to look 10 years from now, 15 years from now, right? Versus, hey, I'm just going to put in 2% as opposed to the 5%. Working with an advisor can show you, here's the benefit of putting in that 5% and getting that 5% match.
Do you use a software to illustrate that or anything? Because I think it's powerful when I see it, when somebody punches in some numbers and said, see, Tammy, if you only added an extra $25 a month, see how much you could have in 20 years.
So I'll use a different program. I'll use Excel, with formulas. I'll use Money Guide Pro if I'm putting together a plan for a client and showing them, the full aspect. But Excel works great if you're just going to show a client, hey, you put in $25, you have this anticipated growth rate. Here's what it's going to look like in 10 years, 15 years.
I saw this graphic once trying to illustrate how much $1 trillion is. And when I saw the graphic, it suddenly made sense. That's a whole lot of money. Your brain can't wrap around some of these concepts. And of course, when you're young, you really aren't, the brain itself, and I don't know if you've noticed this with people, but it's sort of a proven fact that our brains have a hard time thinking in the future anyway. It's just not how people are wired in general. Future thinking is really hard. So I would say to those of you who are federal employees, especially, you want to maximize these benefits. And the only way you're going to find out without a lot of frustration on your part, how these things work and how you can take them and tweak them and maybe add a few solutions, like Jim said, here and there, like an annuity or a life insurance policy, and make it better, right? You've got great benefits, but they can be better. And that's the purpose of hiring someone like Jim. So Jim, it's called Pier Financial. Isn't that cute? I was going to say your tagline should be, I tackle your federal benefit, problems, right? Get it?
That's a good one. I might have to use that.
You might have to steal that one from me. No. So where do you work? What states do you work in, and how do people connect with you and, get an introductory session so you can look at what they've got and kind of tell them what you think?
Sure. So I'm actually located here in South Los Angeles, in the South Bay at Hermosa Beach, hence the title Pier Financial Group. But I work nationwide, essentially. I work in California, Hawaii, Virginia, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Ohio, all across the Eastern Seaboard, Texas. So I guess the easiest way to get in contact, get a free consultation is go to my website, www.peerfinancialgroup.com. You can click on my Calendly link, schedule an appointment with me, free consultation. You'll also get a copy of my book that I've written called The Informed Fed that will be sent to you complimentary. And that goes over all of the federal benefits from health insurance, the group life insurance, TSP, Social Security, goes over the TSP Modernization Act that was passed a few years ago. So a good primer to federal benefits and understanding some of the pitfalls of not knowing exactly how you're set up, because you don't want to leave anything on the table. You want to take advantage of everything that's offered to you. And then the other thing that I would say is that any, not only private sector employees, federal employees, people that are getting ready to retire, or people that are just starting their careers, you want to be proactive. You do not want to be reactive. You don't want to be reactive. You want to be proactive. You want to make sure you got everything set up. You want to make sure you have a plan in place, even when you're young. You can always adjust that plan, but you have a plan. You have the framework.
Exactly. And there are a lot of people that want to retire at 45. It can be done if you start early enough. I know people that have done it.
Of course it can. Yeah, of course it can.
Time is your friend or your enemy, and you decide which one it's going to be. And I know any advisor will tell you there's never a bad time to start. Even if you think that you are totally screwed up on your finances, you can talk to someone like Jim, and he can at least give you some guidance on what you can do to make things better, right? You don't have to be awake at night, tossing and turning, wondering, oh, am I going to run out of money when 3 years into retirement and have to go become a Walmart greeter or something. So we don't want that to happen to any of you. With your federal employees, really, you do need an advocate. You need someone in your corner who knows the system, they know the lingo, they're not confused by all the coding, and they'll tackle it and find the pieces of the puzzle for you. Like Jim Fish at Pier Financial out in Hermosa Beach. But if you want to give him a call, please do, and at least sit down and at the very least, you'll walk away with a sense of where you are and where you need to be, and maybe some of the steps to get you there. So yeah, and his book will be something that'll be very useful for you, because there's nothing else. There's just hardly any help for you, and you know that if you've worked for the government more than a year or two, I'm sure you know how difficult it is to get your questions answered. So do reach out to Jim, get a copy of his book, and talk to him if you would. And Jim, I'm going to end this, but I'm going to have you stay on for a little while. I want to ask you some more questions. And thanks everybody for listening to the Safe Space podcast, where we bring you people that are just outstanding in their field, but we give them all umbrellas so they don't get rained on, right? Anyway, thanks so much. This has been the Safe Space podcast with Tammy D. Bye-bye.
You've done it. You've faced the fear and triumphed. Thanks for listening to the Safe Space podcast with Tammy D. For episode information or to suggest a guest or topic, go to saferpodcast.com.